all put in the chat box, and of course, I think we can take more questions and discuss. So I'll try to keep it very simple as possible. Okay. Right. So the outline is that I'll again try to reinforce the CAPE acronym, which stands for clinical assessment or clinical impression, A for anatomy and PE for pathoetiology. Some basic understanding of facial nerve is pathway right from the pons till it reaches the outside, till it reaches the face. The examination of the facial nerve and the hypothesis, I mean, how we can able to localize and where could be the lesion, and some of the pathologies involving the facial nerve. So I'll just start with one case, just to maybe, I know we cannot interact, but still maybe all of us can think what this child could be having. So this is a real case scenario. This child had multiple investigations and diagnosed was reached a bit late. This was a full-time baby with no adverse perinatal events, but the child after birth on day 1 had some respiratory distress and cyanotic episodes, was admitted in NICU. The child had weak suck and axial hypotonia. There were some facial dysmorphic features. There was more of axial hypotonia. The child was able to move the limbs. The face appeared to be flat with reduced facial expressions. So the primary problem in the NICU the team was facing was mainly related to feeding. The symptoms seemed to improve over a period of like 2 to 3 weeks, and the child was able to initially sent on NG feeds and then slow oral feeds. So at this point, do we think any relevant history can help us to say what this child could be having? So the positive findings we had was a child who was having axial hypotonia, reflexes were very weak, there was swallowing difficulty, the face appeared pretty flat, there was no diurnal variation. So just went back and took some more history. There was no polyhydramnios, the fetal movements was apparently good in the mother. There is no diurnal variation in the symptoms, there is no ocular weakness or ptosis, and there is no seizures, but the reflexes were weak. Now this child was seen again later on. Okay, following up by the pediatric team and the developmental team, the child was having a delay. Delay mainly was in the motor milestone, but the intelligence was also slightly subnormal. The facies was slightly abnormal, long facies, and at this point, probably they thought it could be a congenital malformation syndrome, maybe a CNS malformation with encephalopathy. But the child was able to walk. That was one important thing, even though the child was slow to start to walk. So even at this point of time, multiple investigations, including genetic, MRI, all these things was done, right? So muscle biopsy was normal, EEG was normal. I've forgotten to return here whole exome. The team had sent whole exome also. There was some nasal quality of speech. The extremities were thin. There was some wasting. The reflexes were still poor. So till this thing that we can think, okay, we have a child who was floppy as a newborn. The child is having some motor delay. The child is having some wasting, some thin extremities. So the differentials we could think here could be lower motor neuron type of weakness, whether it is a muscle disease or a neuropathy. But the child is having slow walking. Still the face appears to be a bit of flat. There is no diurnal variation. So there's nothing to suggest if it was a myasthenia. Right? That is facial still is not that, swallowing is still not that appropriate. Now what happens to this child is later on is that at 3 years, there is limb muscle wasting and atrophy is clear there. And probably at this point only, I mean, this is the emphasis I was telling. This was the first time actually the mother was examined and the mother actually showed a hand grip myotonia. So despite extensive evaluation, including spending excess money around close to 50,000 for a whole exome sequencing, a simple investigation to the tune of maybe around 10,000 could have picked up the diagnosis. So a myotonia can sometimes present with variable muscle weakness or stiffness. Sometimes it can involve only the face and the bulbar regions. So this child had actually a congenital myotonic dystrophy, which was confirmed by triplet repeat sequencing. So this case gives us 2-3 things to think about. One, we know in this child, the symptoms have started from the newborn period. So the first thing then we think when the child starts having symptoms from newborn period is probably this is more of a congenital onset or intrauterine onset, so and so. The other clue this the child has was, in addition to facial muscles, there was also probably involvement of other bulbar muscles, maybe pharyngeal muscles, maybe the 9th nerve or the 10th cranial nerve. right? So maybe we have to go beyond thinking that it is just a bilateral facial weakness in a newborn period. Maybe there is also other muscles are involved. The clue was that the child was floppy but had very slow gain in milestones. There was also limb wasting and atrophy. So congenital myotonic dystrophy is one unique muscle condition where the limbs can undergo wasting. Okay, distal wasting of muscles can be seen like a neuropathy. So in this case, the unique was the more of a facial weakness with a normal MRI, normal EG, normal whole exome. So one of the clue in a newborn period, it is that it's always sometimes better to consider this diagnosis, congenital myotonic dystrophy, when the child has feeding problems and facial weakness. I think the other condition when we always think when the child has facial weakness or feeding issues is congenital myasthenia syndrome. Okay, now this was a bit of a tough case, but this just to think about how we should think, how we should probably approach this case in terms of onset. We should approach this case in terms of whether it is upper motor or lower motor, and probably then we should try to think whether it's a bilateral facial involvement, so more favoring a muscles, and then probably reach a diagnosis. Okay. So the CAPE format for this child would be clinical, anatomical, and pathophysiological. So I've just put a framework. How would I have approached this? So early neonatal congenital onset bilateral faciobulbar weakness, which was non-progressive, axial more than appendicular weakness, global developmental delay, no encephalopathy, no epilepsy, normal vision and hearing, with signs of myotonia in the mother. That was a very big clue. So anatomically, it is bilateral faciobulbar, Ellerman pattern. Ellerman pattern we are saying because it is there is atrophy, there is an open mouth, there is a complete loss of creases from the forehead, the mouth appears to be open, and so and so. Etiology is a congenital facial palsy due to congenital myotonic dystrophy. Now for the PG students, it is better to approach every neurological case in this format. I remember telling when I was there that you should try to summarize in terms of clinical, what is the onset and whether it is progressive or whether it is static, and what is the distribution of the weakness. So in this child, the distribution of weakness was an axial weakness along with the facial weakness. So once you are writing the distribution of weakness and putting the other signs, maybe you will be able to form a pattern. So very quick and simple clinical anatomy of the facial nerves. Even if I don't go to the next slides from here, if I just want to say, we know that the facial nerve nucleus is there in the pons. It comes out of the pons, goes through the ear canal, and then comes out of the ear canal and reaches the parotid, right? So it is from the nucleus to the face, it is unilateral. That is, it supplies the same side, right? But above the nucleus, we always call as supranuclear. So in the last session, I always told what is supranuclear, what is nuclear, and what is below the nucleus or infranuclear, right? So the nucleus, above the nucleus, that is above the pons, the opposite side of the brain controls the facial nerve nucleus. So the facial nerve nucleus is controlled by the opposite side. So it is a supranuclear control is opposite side, as you can see. But also the same side also controls the facial nerve nucleus. So here the PG should know that before a child is born in utero, a facial nerve nucleus has supply from both the sides, both contralateral side and ipsilateral side. Okay, right? And but after the birth, the lower part of the nucleus, okay, maybe my cursor is very thin, but this lower part of the nucleus has only contralateral supply, whereas the upper part of the nucleus still has a bilateral supply. So I repeat again, in utero, inside the uterus, the facial nerve nucleus has contralateral supply, but after birth, the lower part of nucleus has only one supply, that is from the opposite side. And whereas the upper part of the facial nerve nucleus is supplied by both the fibers coming from both the sides, right? This is important because if you have an insult which was in utero actually quite early, let us assume the same nuclei, the seventh nerve nuclei, there was insult in utero to the facial nerve nuclei. Because the nuclei has bilateral innervation, the opposite side can take care of the facial nerve and will start re-innervating the facial nerve. And that is one reason cerebral palsy children with, let's say, right hemiparesis will not have right upper facial nerve weakness. If at all it is present, it will be very, very mild. Okay. So in a case of a cerebral palsy, usually your facial nerve is spared. Now, supranuclear control, as I already told, for any nerves, in fact, oculomotor nerves or pharyngeal nerves or facial nerves, from the nuclei downwards, it controls the muscle power. Whereas the supranuclear or the above the nuclei, meaning by the cortex or basal ganglia or the thalamus, is involved with the finer aspect of the movements, like emotions, like having a good synchrony, having a good balance, and so and so. So in a supranuclear facial palsy, let us say there is a big infarct here. Even if there's a facial weakness, it is not as dense or severe as a nuclear weakness or a nerve weakness. This is very important concept. And this would by forth apply to all nuclei, whether it is third nerve nuclei, fourth nerve nuclei, or sixth nerve nuclei. So if you have a cortical lesion or a thalamic lesion or a basal ganglia lesion causing a facial weakness, it is not as dense or complete like a nuclear lesion or a nerve lesion. That's very important. And we all know that the upper face movements is preserved. It is preserved because the upper part of the nuclei has a bilateral cortical and supranuclear supply. One interesting thing is that they tend to have better emotions, emotional facial expressions. Like if you ask them to smile, they may find it difficult to smile, but their spontaneous smile may be much better than on command. So the example for PG students to remember for supranuclear are all those diseases like cerebral palsy, right? Or maybe stroke, or maybe in children also neurodegenerative conditions like Parkinson disease. In children, I mean, we have juvenile Parkinson's. Wilson's disease is another good example, right? So in a Wilson's, if you ask the Wilson child to smile, he may not smile appropriately, but spontaneously when he smiles, he may have a better facial expression. So this is something which is interest. And the Bell's sign is absent. So I will come to this again. What is Bell's sign? All of you know in a Bell's palsy, when they close the eyes, that is a lower motor Bell's palsy, the eyes will go upwards. That particular sign is absent in a supranuclear control. Why this happens, I'll tell you later. So nuclei is at the level of the pons. It is the, always remember, it's a very simple understanding. Sometimes when we say a lower motor, by default, our PGs or our students will think lower motor means it is a nerve involving in the facial canal. But this nucleus is also lower motor. So if you have a point end lesion damaging the nucleus, okay, that is a LMN lesion. But if you have a same point end lesion, I'm just trying to confuse you so that just to make you think. But if you have a same point end lesion, let us say it is affecting the fibers above the seventh nerve nucleus, it becomes a UMN lesion. Okay, I mean, I know this concept can be a bit difficult. So a nucleus and downwards, wherever it is LMN lesion. Anterior horn cell and downwards is LMN lesion. Anything above the anterior horn cell or anything above the nuclei is a UMN lesion. So a point end lesion can also be sometimes UMN, especially if it involves the supranuclear fibers or the fibers coming from cerebellum, basal ganglia, and so on. So, but a point end lesion, if it damages the nuclei, it becomes an LMN lesion. Now, as you can see here, sorry, this is this particular one. The red one is your facial nerve nucleus. Okay, and as you can see, the fibers just go and cross the sixth nerve nuclei in the floor of the fourth ventricle. So this is one important anatomical importance. The floor of the fourth ventricle, if there's a tumor, like if you have a point end tumor or a medulloblastoma, first it will compress the sixth nerve and then it will compress the seventh nerve, right? So sixth and seventh are related to each other, especially the seventh nerve and the sixth nucleus. You can see this area. The seventh nerve and the sixth nucleus are closely related to each other in the floor of the fourth ventricle. The other nuclei which which seventh is close to are the fifth nerve nucleus and the eighth nerve nucleus, and the eighth nerve when it enters the auditory canal. So pons is very simple: 5, 6, 7, and 8. So 7 is close or a neighbor to 5, 6, and 8, right? So what happens at the nucleus? We have the same side facial weakness because the fibers, the corticospinal tract comes from the opposite side. It will cause an opposite side hemiparesis. So the hemiparesis is on the opposite side. So I think this much most of the PGs know. Whenever there is a brainstem lesion, it's a crossed lesion. So you have one side ipsilateral cranial nuclear lesion and a contralateral or on opposite side pyramidal tract lesion. So on opposite side you have a hemiparesis. Okay. right? So the neighborhood signs are very important. So whenever you have a very complete Bell's palsy like lesion, okay, and you very confidently say it's a Bell's palsy, but you have failed to check that there is also a sixth nerve weakness. Mild abduction weakness means it is not a Bell's palsy, it is probably a nuclear lesion at the pons. Okay, so again, just to repeat, anything above the pons is supranuclear. They do not produce very severe weakness, they tend to produce minor weakness, and they control the finer aspects of facial movements. The upper part of the face is spared in a supranuclear or human lesions. In pons, it can be a very complete lesion. Okay, it can be half of the face, complete lesion, but usually it affects the sixth or the fifth or the eighth or the nearby cranial nerves are affected in a case of a pontine lesion or a nuclear lesion. So what happens when the nerve comes out? Okay, this is the place where it comes out. It enters the ear canal. As you can see, that this looks like two bends. Okay, so there is one bend here, and there is also one more bend here. Okay, so this is almost like let me say a four-like appearance, figure like four. So the nerve has 2-3 bends, and it then reaches the parotid and supplies the facial muscles. I'm not going into the too much details, but there are 3 important landmarks inside the ear. One is called the ganglion, a geniculate ganglion, okay, which supplies the nose mucosa and the lacrimal glands, right? And then we have one nerve which comes after the geniculate ganglion, which supplies the ear, and it sort of dampens the tympanic membrane. It is called as nerve to stapedius. And one nerve which comes after the nerve to stapedius is called cauda tympani, which supplies the taste. Okay. So this is, I mean, I will tell you how to simply remember. So it is tear, hear, and then taste, and then face. Very simple. I mean, this was written in one good clinical book, Dijon. So it is tear and hear, taste and face. Easy to remember. Geniculate ganglion for tears, nerve to stapedius for hear, cauda tympani for taste, and the other muscles, the last muscles for the face. So tear, hear, taste, and face. Okay, these are the 4 levels of nerve lesion, especially inside the facial canal. So you can have only this affected or only this affected or only this affected. Never happens that way in complete lesions. Usually, luckily, it is usually complete. All the 3 are affected. That is tearing, hearing, and the taste are usually affected. These are the sensory functions of the facial nerve. So the facial nerve has a motor function and the sensory function. The sensory functions are tearing. Sensory means also secretory functions. Okay, sensory and secretory functions are tearing, hearing, and taste. These are special sensory functions of the facial nerve. Right, all of us know that there is a Bell's phenomena. What is a Bell's phenomena? In a Bell's palsy, we ask the child to close the eyes moves upwards. Now, why does a Bell's phenomena happen? Because we know that if your eyes have to move up, you need a superior rectus muscle, that is the third nerve nuclei. And for your eyes to close, that is your orbicularis oculi, you need the 7th muscle. So there is an equal supply between the 3rd and the 7th. So what happens if the 7th is weak? The 3rd will become more powerful. So if when you're trying to close your eyes, you're pushing the 7th nerve to close, the 3rd sort of overacts and pushes and pulls your eyeballs up. So this is the reason for a Bell's phenomena. So when your superior rectus pulls your eyeball up, that is your Bell's phenomena when you're trying to close your eyes. Okay. So a mismatch between superior recti and orbicularis oculi is nothing but your Bell's phenomena, and it is very completely seen, okay, in a case of Ellermann palsy, because Ellermann palsy affects the muscles of the upper part of the face, whereas Ullmann palsy does not affect your upper part of this face. Ullmann palsy spares your orbicularis oculi muscle. So this much is very simple. Supranuclear, my minimal weakness, upper part of the face is spared. If it is a pontine lesion, then neighbor nerves and nuclei are affected, like the 6th, 7th, and the 8th. And if it is a nerve lesion, you can have some sensory as well as motor involvement, and we can localize where it is. I'll explain to you later, right? So examination of the facial nerve, very simple. I think I've many times emphasized probably to me personally, I think the general physical examination is the most important in any part of neurological examination. So the examination starts with the general physical examination, and then you do simple motor checking of the facial nerve. It's very, very simple. All of us know. Asked to open the mouth, close the eyes, whistle, pucker, and blow the candle, or make a whistling sounds, show the teeth, and all those things. It's very simple. So, but let us try to put in the component. So what are the clues from history? Again, I think I'll skip. If it is birth, like the first case, it is either congenital or neuromuscular. Sudden onset is either vascular or traumatic. Acute is post-infectious like GBS or Bell's or demyelination. Progressive could be tumor, relapsing and episodic. There are only very few causes for relapsing and episodic. I'll come to that later. And from the history, if you have red flag signs, if you have pain along with severe pain with facial nerve, or if you have other cranial nerve involvement, pain over the parotid, or other neurological signs, is a red flags. So the examination, yes, this is the sequence: general examination, motor, sensory, and you can also make a note of involuntary facial movements. It's very interesting from neurological aspect about the other facial movements like tics or myoclonus or chorea or spasms. But yes, as a PG student, if you're able to appreciate some funny facial movements, it will be good. And always make a note of the neighborhood signs. So general physical examination, I may be showing a lot of photos, right? Yeah, also important is that sometimes the examination, especially because we handle children, are different for slight differences will be there in newborn and in smaller children and in older children. As we know, smaller children may not cooperate, so it should be more of hands-off approach, non-threatening. Repeated observations may be required. Sometimes we may need to ask to make videos from the mother. For a newborn, one of the reasons a newborn can have a facial asymmetry is because of a traumatic birth injury. So you can look for trauma inside the ear, whether there is a hematoma in the mastoid and so on, right? So the examination aspects can differ, and in a newborn, indirectly we assess the cranial nerves by primitive reflexes like rooting reflex and sucking reflex and so on. Okay, so there are certain differences between the newborn and older children. We all of us know that. Yeah. So some of the important pediatric based important are Mobius syndrome. So Mobius syndrome is a congenital type of a bilateral facial palsy. As you can see here, not only facial, this child is also having a squint. It causes a bilateral sixth nerve weakness as well. So you'll have a very flat face, you will have this hypertelorism, open mouth, okay, a weak voice, and so on. Okay, so Mobius syndrome is a bilateral facial plus sixth paralysis. It is not due to any single gene disorder, but it is a syndromic cause. And this is very common: depressor anguli oris hypoplasia muscle. Very, very common. You can see in the left side, the face deviates to the left side. So in this case, there is a hypoplasia of the angular oris muscle of the left side. This is also in utero onset or congenital onset. There are many hypotheses why this happens, but this particular muscle here becomes hypoplastic because of inadequate peripheral nerve supply in utero. Is this really serious? No, it is not serious. It is not associated with any brain lesions or malformations, right? But one thing is that if you see depressor anguli oris hypoplasia, some of these children are known to have some cardiac lesions or renal lesions. So just like in golden heart syndrome, where we see a preauricular tag, we are supposed to do ultrasound kidney and echo to look for the heart and the kidney. It is always wise that when we see a depressor anguli oris hypoplasia, to look for the heart and the kidney, just to make sure that there are no malformations there, right? So this is very common, and then yes, some conditions where we see in adults or as well as in children. So this child is having auriculotemporal hypoplasia or a golden heart syndrome with periauricular tag that can be associated with a unilateral facial weakness, right? This is a mother and a child with a long faces, a typical myotonic faces, where the or a myopathic faces also you can say. But if you see a bitemporal hollowing and a very long face, it's mostly a myotonic faces with a V-shaped mouth in a mother. And this type of puckering, like puckering lips, is called as a snarl, S-N-A-R-L, snarl, can be seen in certain muscular conditions. Okay, and if you ask a child, a patient with myasthenia gravis to smile, they have this sort of a smile. This is also called as a myasthenic snarl or a myasthenic smile. Okay. So the smile can look very funny in neuromuscular conditions. Similar facial expressions sometimes can be seen in upper motor lesions like basal ganglia disorders, Parkinsonism, or Wilson's disease. These are two children who have a very fixed facial expression. The fixed face is because of a stiffness of facial muscles, the facial myotonia. I'll show you one video of a facial myotonia, right, where the facial expressions are a bit reduced, or it is in a fixed expressions. Again, a myopathic faces in this child. There is also ptosis along with this open mouth. This is a case of a myotubular myopathy. right? And sometimes you can, this again a stiff facial muscles, but this case of a tetanus, acquired tetanus, where we see rhizus sardonicus. So basically different types of facies, whether it's a myopathic facies or whether it's a myotonic facies. Myotonia, all of us should understand what is myotonia means, stiffness, but it's not like a stiffness of upper motor. It is a more of a lower motor type of a localized muscle stiffness. So you can have a mask-like face in Parkinson disease. You can have facial dystonias with Wilson's. And yes, this is again sometimes seen in children. I have seen, I don't know whether our PGs have come across, where you can see a contracture or almost like a deformity in one half of the face. Okay, one half of the face. So again, when you see this for the first time, probably you may think that there is a lower motor weakness here, and then there is a secondary contracture. Sometimes what happens if you have a Bell's palsy, which is very severe, after a long time you can have a contracture on one side, but this is not due to Bell's palsy. In fact, it's not at all a neurological condition. It is like a localized scleroderma. It's almost like a scar of a burn scar. And this is called a Sperry-Romberg syndrome or a facial hemiatrophy syndrome. Okay, sometimes confused with facial nerve weakness, right? Okay, so so the inspection, we look for the facial symmetry. We look for the facial symmetry. We look for the different types of faces. We look for the blinks. How symmetric are the blinks? How is the blink response? Whether it is reduced or whether it is increased. Okay. We look for the palpable fissure, whether it is equal on both the sides. Please remember facial. One common mistake. Let us assume there's a child in PICU who's having who's comatose, also having bilateral droopy eyelids. Okay. So commonly some PGs may say there is also a seventh nerve weakness in the child. Please remember, facial nerve will never produce ptosis. Okay, facial nerve will never produce ptosis. Facial nerve will produce the opposite of ptosis. There is difficulty in closing the eyes, so the eyes are opened. It's called as lag ophthalmosis. Whenever we see a closed eyes bilaterally ptosis, usually we should think about 3, 4, or 6 or a generalized muscle disorder. So inspection is again the same thing. You saw the eyelid position, contractures, palpable fissures, nasolabial folds. So one way to check the nasolabial folds is to ask the child to open the mouth. It's always nasolabial fold is better appreciated when you ask the child to open the mouth and then check it. It's not in a closed face. Sometimes nasolabial fold may look equal or may not be so much asymmetry may not be noticed. And we know the check facial movements with very simple commands. The most important command is to ask to see up with both the eyes. That is frowning action, because that will very easily say whether it is upper motor or lower motor. Okay, so when you ask to see up in a lower motor station, there is a complete paralysis of half of the face, whereas in upper motor the upper half of the face is spared. So other commands you can remember by remembering face, the eyes, and the mouth. For the forehead, you ask to wrinkle. For the eyes, you ask to tightly close the eyes, and for the mouth, you ask to tightly close the mouth, blow the mouth, make whistling sounds, okay, do chewing actions, blow the candle, and so on, right? So all these methods will give a fair idea of a particular side is weak or not. If there's a very subtle weakness, sometimes you have to ask these movements to be done very fast and repeatedly. So that's another way. So close your eyes, close your eyes, close your eyes, close your eyes, fast. If you repeat it again and again, like blow again and again, sometimes you can see mild weakness in one side. So sometimes you have to do these actions repeatedly and faster to pick up subtle weakness, right? Sometimes you can have a jaw drop because of fifth cranial nerve weakness. So what is almost every part of the face is supplied by the facial nerve except the pterygoid muscles, which is supplied by the fifth nerve, and the levator palpebrae superior is related to your eyelid, which is supplied by the third cranial nerve. So if there is an open mouth and the jaw drop, of course it can be a generalized myopathy, but sometimes it can be a cranial nerve fifth also, right? So this point you have to be careful about the motor examination. So there are certain facial reflexes or funny reflexes. I would use them only probably in a child who's comatose in the PICU. Right? I think some of you would have seen me using glabella tap and snout reflex. The other name for them is frontal lobe release signs. Okay, so in a case of upper motor and facial nerve lesion, these reflexes becomes very active, as it is the rule for any upper motor lesion. So if you have an upper motor lesion, there will be exaggerated reflexes because there is a disinhibition phenomena, right? But exception is this Bell's phenomena, palpable oculogyric reflex, which is Bell's phenomena. It is a purely lower motor. So glabellar tap, snout reflex, and curtain sign is totally different. I'll tell you later, right? So glabellar tine and snout reflex, these two, glabellar tap and snout reflex, are frontal lobe release signs, which is useful if there is an upper motor type of facial nerve weakness where it becomes more active. And Schwastek sign is a sign that we used in tetany, where we tap just in front of the ear, and that particular portion of the face goes for a sudden spasm or contraction. Curtain sign is used in myasthenia. I will tell you later, right? Snout reflex is that when you just keep our finger, press our finger over the philtrum over the upper lips, a child will do a puckering of the lips as if he's going to suck the tube. Okay, so snout reflex is a puckering like a movement of the lips when you press the philtrum very firmly. These are some of the facial reflexes, but not so useful, but can be done in an appropriate setting. So sensory examination, taste, lacrimation, and hearing sensitivity. Practically, we don't do this because it's technically very difficult, but at least in the history, we can ask whether the taste is affected. So in a children with Bell's palsy or a facial nerve weakness, usually have some taste affected. They generally tend to complain of metallic taste. If at all, they can complain, older children. Lacrimation, if you remember the nerve pathway I told you, tear, hear, taste, and face. Tear, hear, taste, and face. So if the lacrimation is affected, or the eye tearing is affected, it means that the lesion is very much proximal in the facial canal. It is at the upper portion. Okay, so that can be a clue whether the geniculate ganglion is involved. Okay, and if lacrimation is lost, it's also important that we should keep the eyes moist by putting lubricants. Otherwise, there can be a chance of a corneal injury. So if the second nerve, that is if the nerve to stapedius is affected, the tympanic membrane is not properly dampened to sound, and even small sounds can be like heard loud. There is hyperacusis. So sometimes, again, this history you may get or you may not get. There will be increased sensitivity to small sounds. So the one way we can examine this is that by sort of clapping on right side and left side, and then checking whether one side is more or one side is less. Okay, but again, these tests are very difficult and very obsolete. It's not that you have to do it, but the motor examination, we have to do it very clearly. So involuntary facial movements are facial synkinesia. So what is synkinesia? Synkinesia is a phenomena where you do one movement, and with that one movement, you get one extra movement. For example, one synkinesia that we is seen in children is that if I ask the child to move the right hand like this, the child will also automatically move the left hand, or will rotate the left hand. Okay, if I ask the child to rotate the right hand, he will sort of rotate the left hand. This type of synkinesia is seen in Arnold-Chiari malformation, okay, and pontocerebellar hypoplasia, rare ones. But synkinesia means that if I ask to do one movement, there will be another movement. Okay, this is in the case of a facial nerve, it's because of the nerve gets injured and it regenerates, but it goes and joins the neighbor nerves like the fifth nerve or the eighth nerve, so on, so right. So one of the synkinesia we see with facial nerve is Marcus gun phenomena. We'll show that later. Tics and tremor, all of us know. Tics is repetitive movements which are not purposeful but can be controlled. There is an urge and there is a pattern in tics. So all of us know facial tics. And hemifacial spasm, luckily we don't see in children, but is seen more in young adults. This is because of irritative lesion to the facial nerve because of a vascular aneurysm. Okay, so when the facial nerve just before it enters into the auditory canal, the artery, that is an anterior inferior cerebellar artery, is close to the facial nerve. At that location, if there is an aneurysm where it is just about to enter the internal auditory meatus, one part of the face will go spasms rhythmically or episodically. Okay, I will show you a video if, in the coming slides. Okay, and facial myocymia is a worm-like movements or shivering movements you can see on the face, which is seen sometimes with the demyelination syndromes. And facial myotonia is stiff syndromes. Now, this is, for me, it's very interesting to look for all abnormal movements and hyperkinetic movements. For a PG, please just be aware that there are certain movements. At least you should be able to understand what is a facial tics looks like. Okay, tics are repetitive movements, blinking, grimacing, okay, non-purposeful movements with urge and a patterned type of movements. Okay, right. So yeah, this child, so when the child is moving the mouth, okay, you can see that there is some blinking of the left eyelid. Okay, left eyelid. So this is between 5 and 7. So chewing movements requires 5, and the eye blinks because of orbicularis oculis. So Marcus gun is because of connection between the 5th cranial nerve and the 7th cranial nerve in utero. It's a congenital ptosis. Basically, it's a congenital ptosis with blinking. So this is a in utero, this is our Aster only. I mean, as a child, I saw an Aster. So congenital in utero regeneration between 5th and 7th nerve causes Marcus gun jaw winking phenomena. So this is a video I got from the YouTube of hemifacial spasm. You can just note the right side. Okay, the right side, carefully note. Yeah, there is this twitching going on. See, there's this twitching going on, and she sort of, there's this twitching. Yes, there's this twitching type of movements going on in the right side. This one. Okay, so this patient is having a right hemifacial spasm because of a right anterior inferior cerebellar artery aneurysm. So this twitching or this contracture like movements here, we saw the twitching like movements increases with time. Okay, luckily not that much seen in children. Just for interest, I put hemifacial spasm. So this again, it's a child I saw in Aster Mims, Calicut. 2 siblings with this strange expression, right? It's a facial myotonia. The elder brother also had the same expression. It's because of the facial stiffness. Always there will be like this peculiar staring look. Okay, it's a Schwartz-Jampel syndrome with facial myotonia. Okay, right. So one interesting sign in a patient with myasthenia, if I lift this eyelid will close. This is called as a curtain sign. I lift this eyelid, the opposite eyelid will close. Okay, so this is nobody knows what is the mechanism for this, but it indicates one of the signs that you can get in the myasthenia gravis. Okay, it's called a curtain sign. Right. So the neighborhood signs, I'm not going in detail. Always check for the 6th cranial nerve because you have to check for abduction. 6th nerve can be affected along with the your 7th nerve. Corneal reflex, 5th nerve can be affected close to the pons entry where it's going to enter the internal auditory meatus. Hearing can be affected in the internal auditory meatus. If you have dysarthria and dysphagia, it indicates 9th and 10th cranial nerves. Then probably the anatomy is more diffuse or it is a generalized mechanism. For example, if you have 7, 9, and 10, then you have a lesion somewhere starting from the mens pons up to the medulla, or it is just a generalized polyneuropathy. So always check the gag reflexes. Okay, and if you get a very weak gag reflexes, then you have to think about a generalized process or an extensive brainstem lesion. And you have to check for hemiparesis. If it is on the same side, it is usually UMN hemiparesis. If it is on the opposite side, it is a LMN hemiparesis. That is a brainstem hemiparesis or a pontine hemiparesis. Okay. So when I say LMN hemiparesis, there is no term called LMN hemiparesis, or it's a pontine hemiparesis. Yeah. So at the end of examination, something at least you should know whether it is unilateral or bilateral, whether it is upper motor or lower motor, or whether the other cranial nerves is involved, and whether there is any other movement disorders, and what is the likely anatomical site. So this is one exercise every PG should do. I think it's very easy. Unilateral only we see most. Bilateral is very, very rare. So, but when you see bilateral, it is usually neuromuscular. It is usually neuromuscular. There are other exceptions. I'll come to that later. And UMN and LMN we just now discussed. UMN is not a very severe palsy. Upper part of face is spared. LMN is complete. It is more severe palsy. You know, staged and lacrimation and tearing can be affected in LMN and so on. Okay. So this is what we need from examination. Okay. So what are some of the pathoetiologies? This is the theoretical aspect of facial nerve, but I'll just go quick. So there are only 2 pathologies. If I want to say there are only 2, one is congenital, one is acquired. So if I say a congenital facial nerve palsy, what are the things which comes to your mind? I showed you one was a Mobius syndrome with bilateral 6th and 7th facial nerve weakness. One is congenital. 2, it could be a congenital CP, hemiplegic CP who's having a congenital facial palsy, or it could be a congenital HIE damaging the brainstem, causing a congenital facial nerve palsy. CP having facial nerve palsy, I told you, is not there actually. It's almost not there. Sometimes you can have a very mild weakness, right? Or you can have neuromuscular causes. The acquired ones are either infections or again neuromuscular, or nerve infections, neuritis, or lesions involving the brainstem or stroke. So congenital and acquired. So there are broadly 2 categories only, congenital and acquired facial palsy. Another way of looking at the etiologies, what are the causes for bilateral facial palsy? So at any point of time, a PG should be able to say what are the causes for bilateral facial palsy, right? So quickly they should be able to say it is neuromuscular causes like congenital myopathy, congenital myotonia dystrophy. And acquired, it could be like a Guillain-Barré syndrome or a Miller-Fisher syndrome. So the common ones they should be able to say fast. What are the causes for recurrent facial nerve palsy? Okay, coming episodically one side again and again. The causes are rare. And what are the causes for UMN facial palsy? It is a stroke, or it is a demyelination, or and what are the causes for element facial palsy? The commonest is Bell's palsy. So if I just forget all the etiologies, by and far the most common cause of facial palsy is always Bell's palsy only, right? So some of the causes for congenital facial palsy are birth trauma, newborn birth trauma because of a difficult birth injury because of forceps. We can have HIE, we can have a hematoma in the posterior fossa in a newborn, which can affect the pons, right? You can have a developmental defect of the first and second brachial arch syndromes. Okay, we have lots of syndromes with golden hour syndromes, Treacher-Collins syndrome, mandibulofacial syndromes, and so on. So the syndromes which involve the first arch and the second arch can have facial weakness. Asymmetric crying thickness, one of the minor one I showed you was hypoplasia of the depressor anguli oris muscle. Whenever you see this, always do ultrasound of the abdomen and echo to look for the heart and the kidney. We can have velocardiofacial syndrome what is also known as Dijot syndrome. Okay, sometimes can have a facial weakness, bilateral facial weakness with heart issues, right? Mobius syndrome and charge anomaly, and neuromuscular causes. These are the causes for congenital facial palsy. So congenital facial palsy by nature, they are very static. They are not progressive. Unless it is a neuromuscular progressive issue, the weakness is not usually progressive. So this is Mobius syndrome, where we have a symmetrical or asymmetrical facial diplegia, abducens palsy, 6th and 7th. Some of them can also have some tongue atrophy also. Some of them can have pharyngeal weakness also. Not all of them will have, and some of them can have mild ptosis also. So a mild ptosis, a temporal weakness. So if you can see the cranial nerves, 5th one, 12th one, but classically we remember Mobius as 7th plus 6th bilateral palsy, associated with club foot, with cleft palate, with epicanthus, and so on, right? So acquired facial palsies, by far the commonest is Bell's palsy, right? So what happens in Bell's palsy? It is the commonest. It is post-infectious. It is some virus. It could be Epstein-Barr. It could be herpes virus. We don't know, right? And we know that the common age is usually 5+, somewhere around 7-8 years we see. It is bilateral only in 1%. It's very rare to be bilateral Bell's palsy, but it can recur. Okay, Bell's palsy can recur in around 10 to 15% of the cases, especially some familial ones have more tendency to repair. Okay, some Bell's palsy sometimes can run in families. Very rare autosomal dominant and recessive ones are known. In this condition, we don't call it as exactly Bell's palsy, but there is a tendency to have this repeated lower motor type of weakness, right? So it is post-viral. The prognosis is very good. Most of them recover by 3 weeks to 3 months. The severity at onset does not mean poor recovery. This is very, very important. Very luckily, children with Bell's palsy, 90% definitely improve. It's only very rare will have some residual weakness. 90% improve, and you can fasten the recovery by giving acyclovir and steroids. Well studied in adults, but extrapolated to children. Okay, so we use I tend to use acyclovir steroids. It fastens the recovery, but even without this, sometimes the recovery is the same. Okay. So what are the red flags in Bell's palsy? This is very important to know. You just say Bell's palsy, but sometimes it could be a pontine lesion, a lesion in the pons. Okay, so how do you know that? So always check for abduction. Always check for abduction on the same side. If the child is able to move the lateral rectus muscle, which means the 6th nerve is spared. If the lateral rectus is not spared, not moving, then then it is a tricky thing. It could be a small nuclear lesion. Okay, because in adults, not in children, luckily. Sometimes Bell's palsy can be because of a tumor from the facial nerve sheath, starting in the facial nerve sheath. Sometimes you can have neurofibroma in the facial nerve causing significant Bell's palsy. So if you have a Bell's palsy which does not return to function by 6 months, or there is increasing weakness beyond 3 weeks, if it recurrence, or if you show hemifacial spasm, or if you have other neuropathies, it's a red flags and it needs imaging with a temporal CT scan, or MRI, whatever is required to evaluate the internal auditory canal. Okay. So acquired bilateral facial palsy is acquired. Okay, not the congenital one. Congenital one is neuromuscular. Very simple. Congenital one is neuromuscular, but acquired ones are Guillain-Barré syndrome. The commonest one which we see is Guillain-Barré syndrome. In an ICU child, it could be a brainstem encephalitis. All of us know the Kerala Nipah brainstem encephalitis. No, it had a tendency to produce bilateral facial nerve weakness along with autonomic signs. So brainstem encephalitis could be one of the reasons. In our country, Indian setting, we should always not forget tuberculosis and HIV. So a very rapidly progressing tuberculosis and HIV causing bacillar meningitis can affect the cranial nuclei in the pons because of the exudate itself or because of ischemia, and you can have a bilateral like facial nerve palsy. Lyme's disease is not seen in our place, at least to my knowledge. I have not seen a Lyme's disease in India, and it's a tick bone disease seen in US. Sometimes you can have a midline posterior fossa brain tumor compressing the bilateral pons and cause a bilateral facial nerve palsy. So definitely the child will have other signs. He will be sick. He can have some gait ataxia. He can have some sixth nerve weakness and so on. And very rarely, as a neurologist, I like this entity, childhood motor neuron disease, or also called as violet brown disease. Okay, I have seen one where there is a bilateral seventh nerve along with other cranial nerves. So for a PG, please remember at least these first three: Guillain-Barré syndrome, tuberculosis, brain tumors. Okay, at any point you should know bilateral facial nerve palsies are these. Okay, so recurrent facial nerve palsies, again, all are very, very rare. All are very, very rare. Melkensen-Rosenthal syndrome is a triad of edema with recurrent facial nerve palsies and a fissure in the tongue. So they can have a orofacial edema, and they can have a recurrent palsies on one side, which becomes permanent later on. You can see fissure in the tongue. I've seen only one child with Melkensen-Rosenthal syndrome. Familial alternating Bell's palsy is a type of a familial, what I just noted. Some of families can have either autosomal dominant or autosomal recessive recurrent facial Bell's palsy. Okay. Hereditary neuropathy with liable to pressure palsy is a type of a neuropathy. This is interesting. It has a very interesting history. The child sleeps on one side of the face. The next day morning, that side of the face will be weak. Okay. The child the next day sleeps on the other side of the face. The next day morning, the other side of the face is weak. So because of a pressure on the facial nerve, that side will become transiently weak, and it will recover by 48 hours to 72 hours. So HNPP, or hereditary neuropathy to liability to pressure palsies, is a rare syndrome, but a very interesting syndrome. And this can also involve other nerves also. For example, the child sleeps by compressing the hand. He can have an ulnar nerve weakness for like 2 to 3 days and will recover. Okay. Right. So the indication for MRI is whenever you have multiple cranial neuropathies with 7, if you have significant pain over the parotid, that's another indication. If you have a hearing loss, if you have a recurrent ipsilateral facial paralysis, any progression or absence of improvement after 6 months, hemifacial spasms, or involvement of hearing in the retrocochlear pathway, these are the indications for MRI imaging. So how to form hypothesis for localization? Okay. Okay. Now till this point, I've just told that there is something called upper motor, lower motor. We need to examine, and we need to have some basic etiology in the mind, whether it is congenital or whether it's acquired. So forming a hypothesis with this knowledge, if you go step by step, I can definitely localize. It is not very difficult. Okay, let's see how. So quick summary. I may be repeating the same thing. Upper motor will spare the upper half of the face. You can have other signs of Parkinsonism or stroke or neighborhood signs or spasticity and brisk reflexes and so on. The lower motor is slightly more, okay? Slightly more. There are 4 levels to it. I'll come to that later, especially in the case of an incomplete facial nerve palsy. Okay, so there are certain clues to localization. Upper motor can show one interesting phenomenon known as emotional facial palsy. I didn't explain that. In emotional facial palsy, right, the spontaneous facial expression are much better preserved. And when a particular patient has a spontaneous facial expression, his facial weakness appears to be increased. This is one interesting phenomenon, sometimes seen with upper motor facial nerve weakness, not always. So just remember, when I told upper motor, I told about these emotions. When you ask them to smile, they may not smile. But when they spontaneously smile, it may look better. And when they spontaneously smile, the facial nerve weakness also appears to be a bit increased. And in that case, it is known as an emotional facial palsy. Okay. The neighborhood signs gives an idea about brainstem syndromes. Complete is usually Bell's phenomena, right? So to localize within the facial canal, if you have an incomplete lesion, okay, this is slightly tricky. If you have an incomplete lesion within the ear canal, sometimes only taste can be affected, or sometimes only hearing can be affected, or sometimes only there can be hyperacusis and so on. So an incomplete facial nerve lesion can impair the taste alone, or can impair taste with hearing, or can impair the taste, hearing, and the tearing, all 3 together. So this is what I told by a very simple mnemonic: tear, hear, taste, and face. Okay. So just assume that if I have a lesion somewhere over here, my hearing will be lost, my taste will be lost, my motor will be lost, but my lacrimation will be normal. I'm just trying to show arrow here. And just assume if there's a lesion here between hearing and tasting, my taste will be lost, my motor will be lost, but my hearing will be present. That is, hyperacusis will be present. So technically speaking, right, if I just draw the facial nerve from the facial canal inside, I'm just trying to go one step ahead and just trying to explain certain things within the facial canal. I mean, for a PG, if it is too much, you may just control alt and delete this particular thing, but it's not that difficult. I try to explain. So if you just assume the facial nerve is there in the facial canal going like this from ear to ear, the B is the brainstem, the J and the P. I just will try to also make it simplified for you. Like you can remember like BJP, saw corona and got feared, or saw corona fear or something like that. It did happen. I did not make this. I saw when I was putting that, automatically it came as BJP saw corona and got feared. Okay, I'm not antagonist for BJP, but it did happen. Okay, by luck. Okay, so now when we see this J and P, J is for geniculate ganglion. Instead of G, I put J, and P is a petrosal nerve which controls the tearing. Now let us assume if there is a lesion. Let us come from below. Okay, let us come from below, and let us say there's a lesion just above this entry to the chorda tympani nerve. If there's a lesion above the chorda tympani nerve, which means my taste and motor function is lost. Okay, so this is one type of lesion. It is a distal lesion. So this is brainstem. This is like face. So this is from proximal to distal. And let us assume there is a lesion above the nerve to stapedius, which means that there is hyperacusis, right? But your lacrimation is normal. And if there's a lesion above the geniculate ganglion, right? Because geniculate ganglion is an important ganglion for relieving almost all the sensations and secretion functions are lost. Okay, so these are the three levels. Okay, there are three particular levels: above the geniculate ganglion, above the nerve to stapedius, and above the chorda tympani. So if it's above the chorda tympani, my taste is lost. Okay, my salivation is lost. If it is above the nerve to stapedius, in addition to taste and salivation, there is also hyperacusis. It is above the geniculate ganglion. All these functions, taste, hearing, everything is lost. So one way to remember easily is that tear, hear, taste, and food. If you just don't want to remember anything, just remember only one thing message from this. If your tearing is lost, tear is lost, it means that the lesion is very, very proximal in the facial canal. It is close to the internal auditory meatus entry. Okay, that one message you can take. So the same thing I've written here: lesion in the pons, lesion in the pons and geniculate ganglion. If you want to take a snapshot, a screenshot or something, you can take it. The same thing in the theoretical form is written here, right? Right. So summary of examination. So supranuclear and in nuclear, UMN spares upper part, LMN is complete, lesion is on, UMN is on the opposite side, in LMN lesion is on the same side. In a UMN sensation is intact, whereas in LMN sensation is variably lost. It can be either taste, or it can be hearing, or it could be something like. When I meant the sensation, I'm not talking about facial sensation, because facial sensation is a function of fifth cranial nerve, trigeminal nerve. I'm talking about special sensation like taste and hearing, right? The secretion is intact in UMN, where the secretion like lacrimation may be lost in LMN. UMN can also be static or progressive. LMN can also be static or progressive. Facial reflex signs can be sometimes seen in UMN. There is no facial reflex signs in LMN. Same side hemiparesis is seen in UMN. Crossed hemiparesis is seen in a brainstem lesion. And cortical and subcortical lesions can have what is known as the emotional facial nerve palsy. Okay, where with emotions the facial nerve palsy appears to increase, like in smiling. Okay. And in brainstem, you can identify by the neighborhood signs. For the facial canal, I told you tear, hear, taste, and face. Okay. If it's a bilateral upper motor facial nerve palsy, this is another important thing which I didn't explain. Let us assume there is a neurodegenerative disease, or there is a bilateral stroke. Okay. So in addition to the seventh nerve, they will have pseudobulbar palsy. So they will have a brisk jaw jerk. They will have a stiffness of the facial muscles. Okay. They will have a hyperactive gag reflex. What happens to a bilateral facial nerve palsy? They can have open mouth with a weak jaw muscles and weak face muscles and so on. Okay. If it is associated with other cranial nuclei, the gag reflex may be absent. So presence of pseudobulbar palsy, that is a brisk gag reflexes, also favors a UMN facial palsy. So for a PG student, they should know the presence of pseudobulbar palsy, okay, and sparing of the upper half of the forehead favors a UMN facial palsy. Okay, so with this understanding, I think by this time you are clear. Understand? If I can give around 5 minutes, I'll just show 2 more cases. We'll see this. So 7-year-old, very simple cases, not like the first case. A 7-year-old with headache for 20 days. This 7-year-old child is having acute onset progressive headache throughout the day. And then after 7 days, he had blurring of vision and facial deviation to the right with slurring of speech. Okay. So just now start thinking, okay, there is facial deviation to the right. Okay, which means there is a left-sided facial nerve weakness. Okay, at this time he had difficulty in walking, unsteadiness, and he had bilateral inward deviation of eyes. So where is the lesion? Where do you think it is? Let us go step by step. Okay, what is the onset? Onset is acute. It is progressive. Yes, it is progressive. Okay. So whenever it is progressive, it could be a brain tumor or a demyelination or a progressive process, isn't it? And so what else is in the history? He's having difficulty in walking and unsteadiness. Okay. Some ataxia-like features is there. Okay. So where do you want to localize the lesion? One important clue is that in addition to 7th, he has bilateral inward deviation. So bilateral 6th is also inward. So 7 plus 6. So we have reached, whenever you see a neighborhood sign, we have reached to the pons, right? Let us see the examination. So that's a bilateral papilledema, bilateral esotropia, that's truncal unsteadiness, that's a left-sided dysmetria, okay, with preserved forehead creases. There's a preserved forehead creases. Okay, there is a poor hand grip in the right hand and the right lower limb weaknesses. So there is a crossed type of hemiparesis, right? So it's an acute and progressive brainstem syndrome with left UMN type facial nerve palsy, right? Here I put left UMN just to a little bit confuse you, because I told even in the pons you can have a UMN palsy if it is involving the supranuclear fibers. Okay, bilateral 6th nerve palsy and features of raised ICT. So left pointal lesion 6th with 7th, it could be UMN, it can be sometimes LMN also, right? Okay, and the etiology here is a malignancy. So 10-year-old girl with speech and swallowing difficulty. So a 10-year-old girl with incidence onset difficulty, insidious, it is like very slow, but also within like 10 to 15 days it worsens. Chewing difficulty, swallowing difficulty. By 6 days she was having difficulty in walking and getting up and wearing chappals. So both proximal and distal weakness. She could fall sometimes. No history of fever, headache or seizure. Her feeding has become slow and labored with choking and nasal regurgitation. So choking, nasal regurgitation says probably there is also involvement of 9th and 10th cranial nerves. She's having weakness in the proximal muscles and the distal muscles. Okay. Let us see what is her examination. So she's having reduced facial expressions. She's bilateral restriction of lateral gaze. So here we saw that she's having bilateral restriction of lateral gaze, which means there is also bilateral 6th nerve involvement is there. Loss of forehead crease bilaterally. Okay, bilateral forehead crease is lost. Unable to blow or puff, poor whistle, unable to pucker, unable to bury eyelashes, bilateral gags are weak, weak cough, etc. So everything is lost bilaterally. Forehead creases are lost. Your gag is weak. Your cough is weak. Your voice is weak, isn't it? So it's very clear from here that 6th is involved, 7th is involved, 9th is involved, and in addition to this, there is also areflexia. So what would be the diagnosis? So if I do this CAPE format, it is acute and progressive bilateral 6th, 7th, and 10th cranial nerve palsy with acute flaccid paralysis. So bilateral LMN brainstem nuclei, cranial nerves, and bilateral motor nerves. So it becomes a acute polyradiculoneuropathy with multiple cranial nerves. So here the diagnosis becomes GBS or a Guillain-Barré, Miller-Fisher type of a Guillain-Barré syndrome. Okay, so I gave you one example of brain lesion. It could be LMN brainstem lesion causing a facial nerve weakness, and other was a generalized polyneuropathy causing a facial nerve weakness. Okay, so finally some pearls, which while I was reading I could get up certain pearls and something which what I understood. So Bell's phenomena, why is Bell phenomena is because of unopposed action of superior recti more than orbicularis oculi. Yeah, this one, the second point, when I was going for my exam, it was asked by my examiner. At that point, I was like not able to think. He said, whenever there's a facial palsy on one side, the tongue on that side can slightly sag towards the same side. So sometimes you may think that there is also tongue weakness, you know. So that is called as an apparent tongue weakness. Okay, so this was asked by my examiner actually in my exams. Okay. So one way to clarify this is that you should ask the child to move the mouth and the tongue and ask to push right side, left side. Okay, so it is clear it is only 7th nerve weakness and not 12th nerve weakness. In hemiplegic CV, as I told you, 7th nerve weakness is not seen as the nuclei, both upper and lower, as bilateral innervation in utero. So one half of the, even if one side is damaged, the other side of the cortex and the supracortical pathways would help in recovery of the nerve function. 7th nerve never causes ptosis. Instead, the other side can appear to have ptosis. So this is very interesting. Sometimes if the one side is open and one side is closed, you may think that the other side is having ptosis actually, but it is not true, right? It's called as a pseudotosis.